Osiris Rex, Rise and Fall of the Beast. In the early morning of September 20th, 2033, the fall equinox sun rose behind the Capitol building dome. It also aligned with the Washington Monument, as seen from the west end of the National Mall. From the roof of the White House, Secret Service agents viewed the spectacle, not recognizing the architectural symbolism in the scene. Many didn't understand that the Egyptian-style monolith, known as the Washington Monument, was a symbol of Freemasonry. The sun rising behind the monument represented the return of the Egyptian god Horus. The same symbolism was still being depicted on the back of the dollar bill as it had been since the administration of President and Freemason Franklin Roosevelt. Half a world away, a similar monolith stood before St. Peter's Basilica at the Vatican. Paganism front and center at the world's most elaborate Christian shrine. By 2033, the 1952 events in the sky over Washington, D.C. were an established historical fact. The 1952 UFO sightings were now acknowledged by the U.S. military. There had been so many incursions of restricted airspace since that time that there was no point in trying to dismiss the sightings as anything other than unidentified aircraft. After 70 years of cover-up, the military had admitted back in 2021 in the preliminary assessment unidentified aerial phenomenon of 25 June 2021 that the unknown objects could potentially be a national security issue. However, there had never been another UFO incident over Washington, D.C. like that of 1952. An unruly crowd of around 10,000 began to gather between the Washington Monument and the White House. Since the inauguration in January, unrest had escalated, the Pentagon becoming concerned that there was a strong possibility of imminent civil war. As the crowd moved toward the White House, its pace quickened, almost like the march of an army. From behind the Secret Service agents on the roof, two ominous shadows slowly descended from the sky, massive dark triangles, each about 100 feet in length, and powered by anti-gravity. Each also bore the insignia of the United States Space Force. These were not UFOs. The president was prepared to put down dissent and continue to move the country forward towards global government. The president attempted to contact his allies in the G7, Group of Seven, the Intergovernmental Political Forum, but was quickly put on hold. The G7 had become dominated by German Chancellor Gustav Schmidt. The U.S. president's problems would be dealt with at a later time. The original intent behind the development of anti-gravity powered aerial vehicles was to provide powerful national defense weaponry. The secrecy behind this effort was incredibly tight. When Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld demanded an audit of the Pentagon on September 10th, 2001, there was 2.3 trillion that could not be accounted for. This was, of course, the day before 9/11 and the terrorist attack on New York City and Washington, D.C. The news media, preoccupied with 9/11, underreported the Pentagon audit story. It can be argued that the Pentagon story had more long-term significance. Huge black project defense technologies, a secret space program, anti-gravity powered spacecraft were financed. There have been huge discrepancies in the Pentagon budget every year since 2001 and probably before. The machinery was in operation, busy building something without the knowledge or consent of the American people. The military, industrial, financial complex had little to no accountability. The visible center of Black project activity was Plant 42, located in the Antelope Valley of Southern California. This was where Lockheed Skunk Works, Northrop Grumman, and Boeing carried out top-secret X-plane and stealth aircraft research, all classified Black budget projects. In contrast, the deep Black budget was a list of projects, each with no description given, that was approved yearly by Congress. The 1947 National Security Act provided coverage for both Black budget and deep Black budget projects, which ultimately produced anti-gravity aircraft and spacecraft. The problem of stability and control had been a major hindrance in developing craft that could rival the UFOs. Since 2013, DARPA had been active in brain research through advanced innovative neurotechnologies. The research was used to augment the brains of soldiers. The technologies included BCI, or brain-computer interface, which eventually was used to integrate the pilot into the control system of the anti-gravity vehicle. The pilots had to be willing to undergo high-level bioengineering. The transhuman arms race had reached a furious pace, overshadowing activity in the private sector. The U.S. competed to create super soldiers, military cyborgs merging man and machine. Human-machine systems included not only BCI, but AUGCOG, augmented cognition, HRI, human-robot interaction, and CT2WS, cognitive technology threat warning system. These systems enhance both the accuracy and speed of a soldier's thinking and decision-making by integrating the brain with computers, robots, animal-machine hybrids. In the early stages of technology development, headsets were used to jolt the brain, greatly increase cognition, and provide a connection to the machinery. Later, brain implants began to be used. Soldiers felt pressured to accept the implants due to a sense of duty and urgency driven by the threat from Russia and China. Those two superpowers were quickly building similar technologies, and both required compliance from its soldiers. Within a few years, the armed forces of the superpowers had developed hierarchies, with the super soldiers at the top, comprising the military elite. The financial elite, making up the other half of the military-industrial complex, strengthened its grip on the global economy. Extreme profits were made from weapons technology. Knowledge of technologies which could free the world from dependence on oil were suppressed. On 3/9/22, President Biden issued an executive order requiring government to develop a plan for issuing CBDC, central bank digital currency. The government control of money through the internet and CBDC increased government dominance over society and eroded individual civil rights. The government monitored and controlled all financial transactions, limiting the ability to buy and sell. If an individual's spending habits did not align with government policy, that person's credit rating would decline, making life difficult. In many countries, these governments' controls brought grudging compliance. It brought the U.S. to the brink of civil war and economic collapse. In a special emergency session at the UN held in January of 2034, German Chancellor Gustav Schmidt spoke to the Assembly. Schmidt emphasized that WMT, or World Monetary Theory, had limitations. A worldwide crisis could be averted if deficit spending was controlled by the UNCE, or the United Nations Security Council. In this way, there would be more equity and less conflict between nations. Germany favored a world economic system between the extremes of market capitalism and socialism. The world reserve currency would have to be moved from the dollar to the global digital currency. The United States threatened to veto the measure, but eventually was forced to concede due to the dire state of its own economy. Inflation had brought a depression in the US and around the world. The US had to agree to a diminished international role or become isolated economically. The US would no longer be allowed virtually unlimited deficit spending. Schmidt had averted a global economic crisis. His speech had the desired effect largely because Chancellor Schmidt was a skilled orator. His physical presence was not very impressive. He looked like a typical bureaucrat in his early 40s, but appearances were deceiving. He had been severely criticized both at home and abroad for being too soft on the far-right neo-Nazi terrorist movement within Germany. Intelligence organizations in the US, Britain, and France had been tracking the resurgence of neo-Nazism within the German government since reunification. Schmidt did little to dispel the impression that Germany was moving to assert its vision of Aryan superiority over the world. Schmidt planned for Germany to rise again as the new Fourth Reich, 100 years after the demise of the Third Reich. Although the immediate crisis had been averted, there was still much work to do. The US was still the world's leading military power, both in quantity of armaments and in technical sophistication. Covert funding would still be supplied to US black budget military projects. An unstable US government would be vulnerable to rogue elements in the military industrial complex. The US economy was only growing worse after deficit spending was reduced. Would the military find justification for a takeover if unrest among the population got out of control? Schmidt pondered his next move. Before entering politics, Schmidt had a distinguished career with the German BNA, the Federal Intelligence Service. His connections with American intelligence were extensive. Incredibly, he had more information regarding U.S. military black budget programs than the U.S. government. In the post-World War II era, German Project Paperclip scientists had taken advantage of black budget secrecy and concealed their continued contact and cooperation with Fourth Reich planners. The black budget would eventually give birth to a breakaway civilization which had the potential to threaten U.S. sovereignty. But first things first, Schmidt knew that he had to consolidate his power in the EU before extending it to North America. To this end, he concentrated on increasing his communication skills. Using holographic projection, he could see himself in real time, perfecting his body language as he practiced making speeches. Adding a virtual audience, he was able to demand participation, drawing the crowd in and creating hysterical excitement. All gestures, facial expressions, dramatic pauses were endlessly rehearsed. He could hammer home critical points with force, precision, and stunning effect. The Chancellor's public relations minister was an old colleague from the BNA, Alfred Keitel. From his BNA experience, he had skill in mining personal data from the population. In his public relations role, he steadily gained expertise in matching the Chancellor's image to the data. He became masterful at making the people see the Chancellor as exactly what they desired in a leader. With AI enhancement, changes in the attitudes and perception of the population were instantly matched by changes to the Chancellor's message. Schmidt's popularity began to increase throughout Eastern Europe outside of Russia. In the late 2030s, the menace of Russia presented an opportunity to those plotting the rise of the Fourth Reich. Russia feared an EU and NATO led by a powerful Germany. Beginning in 2038, Russia used this to justify an increased military presence in the Kaliningrad Oblast along the Russia-Poland border in the Baltic. The border area separation from contiguous Russia had been increased after the breakup of the Soviet Union. Defensive measures against the incursions were concentrated in Germany. Seeing a chance to expand EU borders and for him to gain immense power, Schmidt met with his cabinet to chart a path through the crisis. Germany had managed to build up its high-tech armaments and overall military capability, breaking free of post-World War II restrictions, and hoped to be a match for Russia. The cabinet feared that the Russians planned to counter EU and NATO power by using nuclear weapons positioned in the Kaliningrad Oblast. Their troops were all super soldiers, man merged with machine, able to fight for days without tiring, equipped with BCI, incredible strength, AI-assisted battlefield intelligence, and decision-making algorithms. The EU would have to be united in opposition to the Russian aggression. Schmidt dominated the cabinet meeting, reminding the defense minister and other cabinet members that they had been picked for their posts because they supported the leadership not only of Germany, but for the whole EU. The current threat could be met primarily because Germany had been expanding and updating its military since 2022. Under his leadership, the German soldier was being empowered by transhuman modifications as good or better than that of Russia. America, preoccupied with its own problems, could not be counted on other than providing nuclear weapons deterrence. Schmidt rose to address all at the conference table. Among them was Keitel, not a cabinet member, but present at Schmidt's direction. The Chancellor's speech shocked the assembled elite. Schmidt: Europe looks to Germany for leadership, but we cannot lead because of any superiority that we may have. Aryan superiority is a myth. Let us not be deceived by that old lie. Germany, however, can become superior. We must win the race to enhance our genetics beyond other nations. We must have superior AI. Our military is well on the way to assert its superiority. We must win the hearts and minds of the German worker so that he will be ready and willing to be enhanced and bring us forward. We will be the world leader in industry. By the might of our military and industry, we'll turn the situation in the East to our advantage. We'll gain territory to the East and build a better life for the people. I've asked our Secretary of Public Relations to fill you in on our plans to win over the public. I remind everyone that what will be discussed isn't to be revealed to anyone outside of this cabinet. Keitel began to outline his plan. First, the civilian technical elite must be enlisted. The elite consisted of those who had already become transhuman and were continually pushing the envelope. Their advances were accelerating at an exponential rate. Keitel was to enlist the elite to develop a plan for upgrading the general population. Other nations had been slow to do so. Citizens in the US had long opposed the invasion of privacy possible with AI and transhumanism. The Chinese government wanted to keep control over the technical elite. In Germany, communication would be enhanced because the public would be fitted with BCI. The government's message could be transmitted directly to the minds of the people. The goal was to create a VR virtual reality image of the new Germany and its leader Gustav Schmidt that would be seen by the people of Germany and indeed the whole world. The Chancellor would be promoted as a great uniter. Live media coverage of his speeches would be AI enhanced, broadcast with a split-second delay. In that split second, AI would take Schmidt's words and increase the precision of his body language, the tenor of his voice, the pace of the speech, all for maximum emotional impact on the viewer. His physical image would be made extremely impressive in the VR version, accompanied by inspiring music and backgrounds. For those with BCI, the message would be tailored to the individual. The VR image could reach everywhere with internet coverage. The Chancellor would become a messianic figure in the public eye. German military plans continued over the second half of 2038. NATO allies were not consulted. Germany would take matters into its own hands. The plan called for naval action from the Baltic against the city of Kaliningrad. A cyber operation would disable Russian nukes in the oblast. Ground forces would be deployed from the Baltic after air superiority was established. March 1, 2039 was set as the date for the combined strike by the Army, Navy, Air and Space Force, and cyber military branches. It was determined that the final order would come from Schmidt. On February 22, 2039, tensions increased in the Middle East. Israel had completed excavation and reconstruction of the City of David in Jerusalem and was demanding security concessions from the Palestinians. The Israelis were frustrated in their plans to build a third temple. The ancient Dome of the Rock shrine stood above the ancient site where the Israelis planned to pitch a new Tabernacle of David. The original Tabernacle of David had been a tent structure preceding the first temple. This new structure would serve until the political and religious details could be worked out, enabling the new temple to be built. The Jews wanted protection from the Palestinians to ensure that no terrorist acts were directed against the tabernacle location. Terrorists responded by unleashing a mortar attack against the proposed location. There were no fatalities, but the message was clear. The United States called on Britain and Germany to help prevent an escalation of the crisis. Schmidt postponed military actions in the Baltic and flew to Israel, where he helped negotiate a delay of plans to set up the tabernacle while security details could be worked out. Upon his return, he ordered technicians to create a proposal for deployment of an electronic wall around the city of David. The crisis served to further Schmidt's reputation as a statesman, though it delayed invasion plans against Kaliningrad. Weather conditions would not be favorable till mid-March. Keitel was making marked progress in making Schmidt's image larger than life. Keitel and his staff began to add an aura of mystery to the Chancellor's appearance and surroundings. The imagery relentlessly broadcast to the masses. One of the staff artists borrowed a symbol from popular culture, a spiral pattern with the all-seeing eye in the center. It was to become the icon for the Chancellor's political movement. The symbol had first been seen in a famous crop circle pattern. Surveillance across Europe showed widespread support for his leadership and his ability to unify the continent. The new invasion date was set for March 15th. Timing was critical. The cyber attack and the naval bombardment would have to happen simultaneously. Russia's nuclear option would have to be taken away. The plan was to provoke the Russians to make the first hostile action and then forced them to defend using ground forces only. Their aircraft, both conventional and anti-gravity powered, would be destroyed or prevented from launching. The attack was to begin at daylight. The German naval force had been in position for weeks, and Russian forces continuously monitored it for any hint of hostile action. The Navy in Kaliningrad harbor remained on high alert. The German generals were understandably nervous. If the cyber attack failed, Germany could be facing a nuclear attack. At dawn on March 15th, Schmidt ordered the military operation to begin. From the military command center, the generals were able to monitor developments. A single German submarine lurked at the perimeter of Russian territorial waters. A single Russian destroyer was sent out to investigate. A radio transmission was sent to demand the submarine identify itself. The submarine commander responded that he was in international waters and would not comply. The Russians disputed that the submarine was in international waters and warned the Germans to withdraw immediately. The submarine commander refused. A final warning was issued and ignored. Depth charges were dropped into the Baltic to force the submarine to surface or withdraw. German battleships began to fire smart drone missiles. The Russian Navy and land-based guns responded with their own high-tech barrage. Overhead, the German air attack zeroed in on Russian locations believed to hide anti-gravity powered aircraft. All was going according to plan for the Germans apart from the cyber attack. AI scientists monitored the network, trying to confirm each step in the procedure. They obtained confirmation that the Russian nuclear missile computer system had been successfully breached. The AI algorithm was busily learning the architecture of the enemy system. After 3 minutes, the AI reported that system deactivation was in progress. After an additional 5 minutes, there was a report that the attack had been blocked. Quickly, the scientists launched a second attack using a backup AI algorithm. Russian scientists worked to set up a decoy AI cyber system to throw the German attack off. A fleet of 30 German anti-gravity craft hovered over the Russian Air Force sites. It seemed Luftwaffe intelligence was correct and all the sites were accounted for. Air superiority belonged to the Germans. Their craft continued to hover, making defensive maneuvers as needed to avoid incoming firepower and blocking launch of Russian anti-gravity craft. Russian jet aircraft were quickly shot down. The German Armada launched a fleet of 10,000 miniature submarines. Each was an armored super soldier launched like a torpedo. The landing force covered the entire Kaliningrad Oblast coastline north of the main city. Coming out of the ocean, they raced inland to overcome defensive outposts. Nothing like this had ever been seen in warfare. Russian forces began to withdraw from the coastline as German armored divisions emerged from the Baltic and moved inland. At the German command center, the second cyber attack wave against Russian nuclear missile sites was monitored. Algorithms uncovered the Russian cyber decoy and backup AI was unraveling the launch program. With horror, the scientists realized that the launch sequence was already in progress. Within minutes, a strike would be initiated against American nuclear missile sites in western Germany. The scientists estimated that 4 missiles would be launched in quick succession, beginning in 3 minutes. The AI attack would require 5 minutes to disable the launch system. The hotline from America was ringing for the Chancellor. The Pentagon demanded to know what was going on. The Chancellor advised that Russia had attacked the German Navy and that they had retaliated. The generals in the command center were shouting that the hovering anti-gravity craft should divert to the missile site and attempt to destroy it. 1 minute remained in the launch sequence as Schmidt gave the order. A subfleet of 5 German craft set coordinates for the missile site. As they approached, the crews observed a yellow-orange sphere of about 600 feet in diameter floating above the missile silos. The 5 craft were ordered to break off the attack. The launch sequence had been disabled. After 3 weeks of tank battles, Russia surrendered and the operation was subjected to relentless scrutiny by NATO military experts. Schmidt left it to the generals to explain. The NATO officials had many questions. Who fired the first shot? Was the submarine indeed in international waters? Why hadn't NATO been alerted that the naval exercise was so close to Russian territory? How had the nukes been disabled? By AI or by the observed UFO? The NATO officials wanted to see detailed transcripts and computer records of the timing and coordinates of all forces in the operation. Chancellor Schmidt sat in conference with his generals after NATO officials left to look over the data and draw conclusions. Schmidt wanted the assessment of his generals in advance of the NATO report. The generals advised that the Russians fired the first shot when they dropped depth charges on their submarine. The submarine was less than 2 meters outside of Russian territorial waters. NATO hadn't been notified because the Russian response could not have been known prior to the operation. The most critical question, how had the nukes been disabled, could not be answered. It was only known that the cyber attack had failed. I can tell you how the nukes were disabled. Keitel had not been invited to the meeting, but had opened the conference room door. His security clearance was high enough to allow him access. The ranking general, sarcastically, "Please inform us, Mr. Secretary of Public Relations." Keitel, ignoring the sarcasm, "I would be glad to, sir. The UFO sighted over the missile silos disabled the nukes." The generals looked at each other. They had been hesitant to bring up this possibility. Schmidt, "Please tell us how you know that. The scientists confirmed that we failed to disable the nukes. The UFO was seen at the time, but how can we verify that the UFO did it?" Keitel, "Because I asked for the UFO to be deployed." The generals struggled to control their laughter. Schmidt, remaining serious, "Gentlemen, please consider that there has been military contact with UFOs for decades." Ranking general, becoming serious, "But, Mr. Chancellor, we've never been able to order them to fight our battles." Schmidt, to Keitel, "How are you able to get the help of the UFO and whoever operates it?" Keitel, "With proper technique, the UFO operators can be channeled. I informed them that there was potential for nuclear war, although I think they already knew it. There have been many instances of UFOs disabling nukes in both the US and Russia." There was stunned silence. 2 weeks later, the NATO report was issued, verifying that the cyber attack had failed, but stopping short of concluding the UFO had intervened. Incredibly, Keitel was able to promote the Chancellor as both a peacemaker and a military tactician. In early 2040, Schmidt and Keitel staged a huge rally where the Chancellor unveiled his plan for solving the Middle East problem. The AI technicians had worked out the details for the electronic wall around the city of David in Jerusalem. Schmidt's enhanced visual image was seen by hundreds of millions around the world. The crowds gave him thunderous applause. He boasted of his military victory and confirmed rumors that his Secretary of Public Relations, now Communications Minister, instigated the UFO attack. The world became full of speculation. Were the extraterrestrials peacemakers in stopping nuclear war, or did they support the German military? If the latter was true, Germany could become an unstoppable military power. The EU became united behind the Chancellor. By late 2041, David's Wall had been activated and provided secure electronic protection against terrorist attack on the city of David. Schmidt and Keitel attended the opening ceremony. The new Tabernacle of David stood ready. All the furnishings had been set up as in the older Tabernacle of Moses. The brazen altar, brazen laver, altar of incense, table of shewbread, golden candlesticks, and the Ark of the Covenant. The singers and musicians with psalteries, harps, and cymbals continually sang praises to God as at the time of David. The priests prepared to make the first sacrifice on the brazen altar. The ceremony was broadcast live around the world. Before the flames of the altar could consume the sacrifice, and to the shock of the millions watching, the fire was suddenly extinguished, a final puff of smoke ascending. In the awkward silence, the voice of the communications minister addressed the crowd. Don't be concerned. The fire of sacrifice will fall from the sky. A small tornado of flame descended from the clouds and ignited the sacrifice. This was no cheap trick. The origin of the flames could never be determined, but was thought to be in the upper atmosphere. Keitel had stolen the glory that should have gone to the God of Israel. Schmidt's AI image boasted of his accomplishments to the whole world. To those who had become transhuman, his image spoke to their minds continuously. He had begun to call himself Weltführer, world leader. He made no secret of his ambitions. His goals were to control religion, technology, and military power. The Weltführer and his communications minister realized that world religious beliefs in the 21st century have fractured into two camps. Those that accepted the aliens as space brothers here to help humanity, and others that rejected them as deceptive entities trying to enslave the world. The latter camp was mainly comprised of Orthodox Jews and fundamentalist Christians. New Age religion and the Roman Catholic Church led the camp that was friendly to the aliens and to the Weltführer. The Weltführer and Keitel actively sought the unification of the Catholic New Age camp behind their leadership. The fundamentalist Christian minority in America became the primary counter movement against world government. The Weltführer turned on the Jews, threatening to deactivate David's Wall and remove his protection against the new tabernacle. He boasted of his own power and questioned the power of the God of Israel. If God was so mighty, why couldn't he protect the Jews in their tabernacle? Keitel and his team got to work infiltrating U.S. technology. There was little benefit in penetrating the civilian technological elite. By the early 2040s, they were busy becoming transhuman gods through genetic engineering and nanotechnology. The CIA technological elite was another matter. They were the key to accessing the CIA AI brain used to monitor the population and control propaganda. If Keitel could gain control of the CIA network, the Weltführer VR image would be able to get past AI defensive barriers and deepen its influence on America. Using the Weltführer's contacts from his time in the BNA, the U.S. national security system began to become open to exploitation. The CIA's tentacles extended throughout the military-industrial complex. CIA-directed black budget weapons programs were hidden by such deep secrecy that even the President, Congress, and Pentagon were ignorant of what was going on. Public awareness of U.S. anti-gravity powered aircraft began with the sighting above the White House in 2033. It was unknown, however, what the total strength and offensive capability of these craft were. How many were there? What weapon systems were built into the craft? Certainly a military coup could be engineered, a revolt by the military-industrial complex. But careful planning and detailed intelligence were needed. What factions within the U.S. military would oppose the coup, and what weapons would they control? In the U.S. presidential election of 2040, Senator Thomas Clark ran on a platform of breaking free from the UN-imposed deficit spending limits and gaining control of the CIA and Pentagon. He argued that the EU, led by Germany, had gained too much control of the world economy. A resurgent U.S. would serve to balance the power of the EU, benefiting the rest of the globe. The president was commander-in-chief, and Clark argued that the CIA and military should hold no secrets from him. Early in his first term as president, he gained some concessions from the UN, and indeed the U.S. and world economy showed improvement. Taking on the military-industrial complex was more of a challenge. In his re-election bid in 2044, he emphasized his accomplishments in handling the economy and vowed to increase his efforts to get more transparency between the CIA, the Pentagon, and the president. The Weltführer looked for a crisis in which tensions between the CIA and president could be exploited. After he was re-elected, Clark's new CIA director promised more openness between the CIA and the president. Rogue elements in the CIA were not happy. Many would lose their jobs and national security would be at risk. An assassin ended the life of the CIA director in mid 2045. A congressional investigation found evidence that CIA personnel were responsible, but the evidence was inconclusive. Clark began the process of dissolving the CIA and replacing it with a new intelligence organization under the authority of the president. The Pentagon protested that the president's actions would lead to instability and the country's downfall. Public opinion supported the president. The Pentagon threatened military action. In January 2046, anti-gravity aircraft appeared over the White House as they had in 2033, but this time they bore the spiral insignia with the all-seeing eye in the center. The craft were from Imperial Germany. Similar craft guarded underground locations known to house U.S. anti-gravity aircraft. Keitel announced that Germany was conducting a UN-sanctioned peacekeeping mission. As the peacekeeping mission extended into 2047, the UN negotiated a peaceful solution, allowing the continued existence of the CIA with the condition that the president would be advised of important national security information. The UN instructed the German occupation force to be withdrawn. The Germans responded by taking control of UN headquarters in New York. The United States stood alone. Most of its former allies were under the control of the Weltführer. The people of the U.S. organized a resistance movement against the occupation force. Keitel responded by channeling the extraterrestrial space brothers. The force of millions of alien-human hybrids, which had been hidden in plain sight, began to assert its presence. Although the hybrids looked fully human, they had alien powers of mind control and telepathy. Most of the population had no defense against the alien incursion. This was what UFO abductees had long reported as the change, where the world would be dominated by hybrids. The reports had generally been ridiculed prior to the takeover. The Weltführer descended from the clouds like an ancient god aboard a Vimana craft. Keitel conferred with him as they looked over Washington, D.C. Weltführer had a busy schedule. After landing, the Weltführer addressed a crowd of thousands gathered before the Washington Monument. From the Lincoln Memorial, he looked out over the crowd, the reflecting pool, the Washington Monument, and the Capitol. He told the assembly, and virtually the whole world watching on live TV internet coverage, that he stood for peace and his actions had the goal of promoting stability throughout the world. He stood for progress. Evolution to transhuman level would not be for the elite only. All the world would become transhuman. All would be in communication with the gods. The whole world would become enlightened. A new golden age. With his generals and advisors, he slowly proceeded past the Washington Monument to the Capitol. They ascended the Capitol steps under tight security. As the Weltführer entered the Capitol dome, few fully understood the significance of this moment. According to Masonic scholars, the dome represented the pregnant womb of the goddess Isis, wife of Osiris. The dome was about to give birth to the resurrection of Osiris as his son, Horus. Looking up at the ceiling of the dome, all could see the fresco called the Apotheosis of George Washington, showing Washington becoming a god. 72 stars circled the dome around the Apotheosis, representing the 72 angels of the ruling council who had fallen, but whom the Masons revered. Around the perimeter of the rotunda stood elite Masons, congressmen, and leaders of the nearby House of the Temple. Keitel stood at the center of the rotunda temple. He revealed that Masonic prophecy was about to be fulfilled. The apotheosis would take place. He channeled the pagan gods. Osiris, or Apollo to the Greeks, was about to be reborn. Not only would the Weltführer be filled with the spirit of Osiris, but he would also become his son, undergoing genetic transformation. He would be given the DNA of Osiris, and the Weltführer would be reborn as the god Horus. Under the gaze of George Washington, every cell in the Weltführer's body was transformed. The seed of the serpent was now in human form. Standing before the assembly, his appearance was majestic, like the Nakash in Eden. At that point in time, Keitel vanished. An instant later, Keitel materialized at the Vatican in front of the Egyptian obelisk in St. Peter's Square. He faced the dome of St. Peter's Basilica. The Pope was leading a prayer for the Weltführer. The crowd was understandably startled by Keitel's supernatural arrival. Keitel walked quickly through the crowd towards the Pope, the faithful giving him a wide berth. The Swiss guard stood at the entrance below the balcony where the Pope was praying. His eyes were closed. The soldiers moved aside to give Keitel access to the Pope. Ascending to the balcony, Keitel waited for the Pope to conclude his prayer. The Pope turned to Keitel and nodded. He knew why he had come. Turning back to the crowd, the Pope asked them to welcome the esteemed representative of the Weltführer. He asked Keitel to address the assembly. The communications minister knew that the whole world now hung on his every word. He emphasized the significance of events in Washington, D.C. He had been miraculously transported from the U.S. Capitol to the Vatican. To viewers around the world, Keitel radiated a peculiar energy. He proclaimed that he would lead the unification of the world's religions. This was the great key to world peace. In unity, the universe would spiral towards the omega point, singularity. He was the prophet chosen by the gods to lead humanity into the singularity. All must evolve both physically and spiritually. Our consciousness would be in harmony with the universal consciousness. He exhorted the world to join him. Amid thunderous applause, he turned to the Pope, nodded, and then disappeared. He left only his aura. Not everyone was awed by the Weltführer and his prophet. There were those who preferred death to living under a totalitarian regime. There were those who refused to become transhuman. They were perfectly happy being merely human. Many Orthodox Jews and Christians refused to comply with anything ordered by the Weltführer or the prophet. Though the lies were repeated often and with increasing force, there were some who were not fooled. These were the people who were targeted by global leadership. At his headquarters, the former United Nations building in New York, the Weltführer addressed world leaders in the assembly hall. To maintain order, the population would be under constant AI surveillance. Data processing capabilities had improved exponentially. Important information was processed so rapidly that there was virtually no delay in authorities being notified of violations. Those who had been upgraded could easily be tracked by remotely accessing their DNA signature. Trade with those who refused to be upgraded was forbidden. Any who had been upgraded and defied the ban would be imprisoned. The goal was to starve the opposition into submission. The prophet railed against the resistance. They were out of harmony with the rest of the world, a cancer that had to be eliminated. The resistance coming from fundamentalist Christians was particularly troubling to world leadership. These Christians prayed for supernatural help from God. They were able to discern the presence of hybrids. They not only were able to resist hybrid mind control, but came against them, clearing neighborhoods of the alien human entities. They pray for those who are being deceived, keeping them from yielding to the decrees of the Weltführer and his prophet. This was no small insurrection. Their numbers were growing into the millions. The counter-revolution was met with violence by the military and police. Still, the Christian resistance grew. Despite the Christian resurgence, the world was now passing into the darkest period in history. The Weltführer sought a final solution, eliminating the resistance. The prophet channeled the extraterrestrial gods. An armada of UFOs descended to relocate all not in compliance. All would be transported to another world. There they would be rehabilitated. This had been prophesied for decades by New Age shamans. Those being relocated said tearful goodbyes to family and friends and were taken on board the craft. Within days, greetings were sent from the abductees. They apparently were safe and surprisingly happy given the circumstances. The planet they lived in looked like paradise. The truth was horribly different. On entering the craft, each abductee was given a full body scan to obtain a positive identification. All data was downloaded to create an AI representation of the abductee, every aspect of his or her personality. After the examination, the abductee was led to a small chamber, large enough for one person only. A quick dose of tranquilizing gas rendered the abductee unconscious. Death soon followed. The ashes would be released in the emptiness of space. The abductee's AI image continued to communicate with loved ones. This deception reduced panic among those being relocated. 10 demonic entities had given their power and strength to the Weltführer and the prophet. The world leader was a manifestation of Satan in human form, the Antichrist. The false prophet led the formation of Mystery Babylon, the world religion. God would use the 10 demonic entities to destroy Mystery Babylon. The seed of the 10 demonic entities were alien human hybrids and would not succeed in merging with humanity. God would strike the final kingdoms of the world, and the entire power structure would come crashing down. In the end, God would reestablish control. He only would have the power and glory. Revelation 19:6. And I heard as it were the voice of a great multitude, and as the voice of many waters, and as the voice of mighty thundering, saying, Alleluia, for the Lord God omnipotent reigneth.